You're listening to The Head Trash Show with me, Alexia Leachman, author of Clear Your Head Trash. Head Trash is the home to the Head Trash clearance method, which you can use to get rid of the fears, stresses and anxieties in your life. Every week I'll be sharing insights, stories and interviews to inspire you to clear your head trash so that you can find calmness, confidence and clarity in your life and work. To find out more about clearing head trash and creating a headspace, head over to clearyourheadtrash.com. And now for today's show. Hello and welcome back to the Head Trash Show. My name is Alexia Leachman. Thank you so much for joining me today. Now on today's show, I'm going to be talking about abandonment. We do have a lot of fun on this show, don't we? Yes, abandonment. Now, this is one of my Achilles heels and something that I've been wrestling with for what seems like forever. And if you've been listening to the podcast for the last few episodes, you'll probably know that I'm a bit into my trauma clearance right now. And for me, abandonment is one of those notes I've written in my clearance book, because yes, I do have a clearance book with all the things I need to clear in it. And I do work through it diligently. And so as I've been getting into trauma clearance, I've made a list of like suspects where I think there's probably a lot of trauma hiding for me. And if you listen to a previous episode where I've talked about hunting down unresolved traumas, then one thing that I talk about in that episode is how, sometimes there's a lot of, well, not sometimes, guaranteed, we all have a lot of unresolved traumas that we are carrying. And these are traumas that have come about from events that we probably can't remember and that are too small to recollect and that we don't even know that we probably had them. They're basically total unknowns. And so by working in this way, I've been really thinking more along the lines of themes and how there are certain themes that we wrestle with throughout our lives that seem to be fairly stubborn. Now, for me, abandonment is one such theme, but it's not one of the hidden traumas for me because I'm a child of divorced parents. So abandonment is one of those where I've got a very clear idea as to where my abandonment issues come from. So this is what this episode is about. It's really talking about abandonment and what that really means, because the more I sort of was preparing myself to work on healing my own abandonment trauma, the more I was giving this, quite a lot of thought. And the one thing that I think is quite important to do when we're coming to trying to wrestle with our emotional crap is to just be really clear with ourselves as to what we mean by some of this stuff. And so abandonment, what do we mean by abandonment and feeling abandoned? And for me, when I was thinking around this, I was invited to think about things like rejection and being left behind or being left out or excluded. These are all kind of in the gang, aren't they? When you think about abandonment, those are similar themes that kind of come up. They're like buddies, aren't they, with abandonment? And a lot of us do wrestle with rejection. I mean, that's a big thing that comes up a lot for my clients, for sure. And this idea of being left behind. I know one thing that I always used to have when I first learned how to drive was I desperately wanted to overtake the person in front, and it didn't matter. And I also hated when there were cars behind me because I felt like I was in the way. And I feel this whole idea of being left behind was just showing up in my driving, for example. And really, it's very much tied into abandonment. How these things kind of leach into your life is really quite interesting when you sort of look back with wise eyes or with insights or hindsight or whatever you want to however you want to express that idea. And so for me, when I think about abandonment, there was definitely this, I was throwing in the mix of feelings of rejection, feelings of being left behind or left out or dumped or that kind of thing. And so, I think that was really important for me to kind of be clear on that. And the other bit that I think was really key is to think about, when we think about being abandoned, it sounds like something that's done to us in a deliberate or conscious fashion, like you've been thrown away, you've been rejected. This kind of, somebody is rejecting you. They've kind of deliberately and consciously rejected you. And as a result, you feel abandoned. But actually, a lot of these feelings of abandonment arise not from these where the other person has done that deliberately or consciously. It's more really, this is how you felt in that moment. And again, that's quite important to make that distinction or to call that out, because sometimes if we kind of move along this journey with an assumption that the person who behaved in a way that made us feel abandoned, if we're kind of thinking, oh, well, they did that on purpose, or they did it deliberately, or they did it knowingly, then suddenly we can start blaming them for a lot of stuff, and there can be a lot of resentment piled in. And before we know it, we're not just dealing with abandonment stresses and issues and traumas, we're also dealing with this blame and resentment, and then it becomes very painful, and you've murked the water so much. I think that isn't an actual term, murking the water. We've muddied the water so much at that point that it can become quite painful for us to even look at it and start unpacking it and figuring out what's going on. Whereas if we just try and simplify it as much as we can and get clear on the fact that, well, maybe they didn't deliberately abandon us, maybe they didn't seek out to make us feel that way, then that can help us kind of move forward, maybe with a little less emotional pain, and we just kind of realize, well, oh yeah, okay, I felt that way, but that's just on me for choosing to feel that way. And you might think, well, I didn't choose to feel that way, but on some level we did, right? So, and I think if you think back to, for example, well, this happened to me when I was a kid, and I'm sure it probably happened to you, where you got lost in the park or lost at the supermarket. I'm sure in that moment, your parents or whoever was meant to be looking after you didn't stick you in the play area and then run off behind the bush and hide and wait until you didn't see them and until you were you felt totally abandoned in the park. No, they were probably running around screaming your name, trying to track you down, calling the supermarket staff to try and figure out which aisle you were in. I mean, they were probably fraught with stress at that point. They certainly hadn't deliberately abandoned you. So, but that doesn't change the fact that as a child, you would have thought that you were abandoned and rejected and left behind and all of those things. So I think that's the first thing where I got to was right, I've just got to be clear that this wasn't necessarily done to me in a deliberate fashion. And compare that to, let's say, if you might have liked enjoying a few drinks in your youth and your friends thought it might be hilarious to abandon you in the city centre with nothing more than your underwear because, that would be hilarious. Now, that is a deliberate and conscious act of abandonment. Very, very different from being lost in the park or in the supermarket when you're a child. So just to make that distinction, I think, is really important before we carry on. Now, when I think about my own experience, I mentioned in the intro that, I grew up in a divorced household with a single parent family. So my parents divorced when I was 4. So when I think about my abandonment issues, I think, well, duh, Lex, of course you've got abandonment issues because divorced parents, duh. And I remember even saying to my mum when I was really young, I mean, they divorced when I was 4. I remember thinking that I thought it was my fault that my dad left us. And my mum was like, no, of course not. But I honestly felt that way. I honestly felt like I was to blame that he left. And then therefore he left because of me. I was the one that made it all happen. And the fact that my mum reassured me to the contrary doesn't matter because, again, it's how I felt as a 4-year-old, as a 5-year-old, and how that scar, that emotional scar, was just, the damage was done at that point. It doesn't matter what the actual facts were. That is how I felt. And you think about most divorces, right? I bet you that the parents rarely separate because one of the kids is super annoying. It's usually because the relationship has broken down in some way and it's just not workable for them to be together anymore. And one of them has got to leave the family home. And I'm sure that in many cases, that parent that needs to leave the home is absolutely distraught and heartbroken and doesn't want to leave the family home and the child and all of that. But that's just the way that it's got to go. And so no matter how the parent feels in that situation and what the parent's intentions are, the kids are going to feel abandoned. That's just how it's going to roll, because just by not having the parent there every day at home, doing all the things, making breakfast and all of that stuff that happens in the family home, just by the parent not being there, that the child will experience that as abandonment. And that's just the way it goes. We can't, there's very little that we can do about that. So, I think it's just really important that we kind of get clear on this, because having blame as part of this mix just really does not help us when we're trying to kind of wade through our emotional shit, because it helps to kind of, I certainly do find it much more helpful to kind of separate some of those strands, because then it just means you can break it down into bite-sized chunks, and that just makes it easier to get rid of, rather than looking at this big murky mess and it makes you cry, or somewhere inside it hurts and you don't want to look at it. So, when you can separate it out, that, I think, for me at least, that really, really helps me. And the other thing I think as well, when you think about, let's say, parents, sticking with the parents theme, is that, like as a divorced kid of a divorced family, it kind of felt really obvious to me where my abandonment issues came from. But they weren't where I thought they were. Sure, there were quite a few daddy issues that piled up as a result of the divorce, and how that made me feel. But what I wasn't prepared for when I did dig into this, and it's not like I'm not new to this abandonment healing. I've been trying to wrestle with it for a while. And I did the Hoffman process many, many years ago. And if you haven't heard of the Hoffman process, it's absolutely fantastic. It's like a week-long therapeutic retreat where they just throw all sorts of modalities and healing approaches and therapeutic approaches at you, and really try and sort you out in many, many ways. And I found it to be hugely, hugely healing for me, and the beginning of my real sort of healing recovery in terms of my own headspace, let's put it that way. But when I went along to that, I was kind of prepared for the daddy issues that I'd be bringing to the table. But what I wasn't prepared for was the mummy issues, because my mum was there for me. She could have looked after me. She raised me. She sacrificed so much for me and my brother that, as far as I was concerned, she was almost on a pedestal kind of thing. But she died when I was 30, and apparently that made me feel incredibly abandoned and hurt. And yes, when I tune into that, of course, but I'm sure that when she died of cancer, and it happened very, very fast over a 6-week period. So it was a very sudden death. She didn't deliberately die to abandon me. That wasn't the case. But nevertheless, even though as an adult, I still felt like my mother had abandoned me. And I had to kind of really, really dig into that and come to terms with those emotional feelings and the scarring that left for me. So, I just want to share that with you, because I think it's this piece about what does abandonment look like? What acts, human acts, what does that look like that leaves people to feel abandoned? And it's not always as obvious as you might think. And I think taking out the deliberate piece, or when people doing things deliberately or consciously, can really help you to kind of see what's going on and see where your own abandonment feelings might be coming from, or might have come from for you. So that's where I got to with my, trying to pull apart the abandonment thing. And the more I dug into abandonment in my family, at least, I noticed, which was really interesting, this pattern of abandonment that actually had been going on for quite a few generations. When I looked in my family, there was my grandmother, for example. So she was born in the early part of the 20th century. And she was abandoned by her community when she fell pregnant with my mum outside of wedlock. So she was ostracized and made to feel like, like excluded, rejected, all these things that, I mentioned at the beginning. She was made to feel like that in a very, very big way. And then my mum, as a child, was abandoned by her, my grandmother, because World War II broke out, and she had to be taken away from Paris, where there was a lot of action happening in 1940, for her safety, and she got taken to an orphanage to be looked after during the war, until she was retrieved afterwards. So as a child, as a baby, she was abandoned by her mother. So this abandonment theme is, and I don't know about my great grandmother, and I don't know about anything before that, but you can see already this pattern is starting to perpetuate. And then my mum was then abandoned again by my dad as part of the divorce. But my dad, he was also abandoned because his parents did divorce. So he was abandoned by a parent too. So here I am, the daughter of an abandoned person who herself was the daughter of an abandoned person who probably was also abandoned by her parents in some capacity. And my dad as well. So I'm kind of like, I'm carrying generations worth of abandonment, within me. You know, think about this pattern. It's more than a pattern. It's within my DNA. The memories of this abandonment are actually within my cells. And I've literally inherited them through what my previous generations have experienced or lived. And again, that was quite an eye-opener for me, because that said to me that really, you know, when I think about how I'm experiencing things like rejection today, or being left out, or feeling excluded, or left behind, you know, all those things I touched on at the beginning, some of those hurts that I'm maybe reacting to are probably not even mine, that there may be ones that I've inherited that I'm still feeling very, very real for me, because it's literally the memory of those that's within my cells. And if you've listened to the interview that I did with Dr. Thomas Verney, he'll speak to the science that backs all of this up. You know, what I'm not talking about here is crazy Lex talk. The memories that we're carrying with ancestral trauma within ourselves is a very, very real thing. So when I was thinking, well, you know, I need to heal my trauma, I needed to rethink how I was going to do this, because I needed to kind of extend and expand the scope for me, because up until then I was really focusing my own trauma clearance work around my life and my life in utero, you know, sort of taking it beyond what I might consider to be my life by moving the dial forward a bit to include that time when I was being carried by my mother. But actually, I needed to go much further than that. I needed to start really looking at those cellular memories that I'm carrying, and where those have come from in terms of my ancestors, and how I've inherited or acquired those memories within my cells as a result of my lineage and my genetics and my parents and all of that. And I thought, well, actually, while I'm here, hell, I might as well just look at my past lives too, because past lives are also, there's many authors that have written about how traumas experienced in past lives are playing out in people's lives today. So I thought, well, while I'm at it, let's just throw past life trauma in there too. So suddenly I'm now looking at a situation where I'm needing to clear trauma from all of these parts of life that have all led to me experiencing things today. So what did that mean? I mean, how many traumas am I looking for? So, you know, if you've listened to my previous episodes, you'll know that I'm a bit of a numbers person. And so I was kind of curious as to how many traumas I might be carrying around from these different facets or in these different pockets, right? So in my current life, and I've mentioned this in a previous episode, there were 121 episodes, experiences or events or micro moments or whatever you want to call them. There were 121 experiences that my emotional system had deemed relevant in the context of abandonment and rejection and being left behind and all of that thing. 121 experiences in my life. Now in utero, I had 5 experiences like that. But I mean, these numbers are tiny. You think 121 is tiny. You wait till you hear what's going on with the other ones, right? Past life traumas. Get ready for this, right? 11,800-ish events. I didn't kind of get too precise at that point. But yeah, when I think about how many past lives I may have had, right? I'm carrying that many experiences. And then ancestral traumas, it came to over 15,000. So basically, I'm carrying over 27,000 individual experiences where I felt deeply abandoned, rejected, left behind, excluded, all of that. This is what I'm carrying with me today. So when you look at it in that context, you think, well, no wonder, Lex, you're like, this is a thing for you. Like, there's a lot of stuff you're carrying there. There's a lot of pain that is being brought up for you around this theme, right? So, you know, when I was looking at numbers like that, I was thinking, wow, I've got to let this stuff go. I've got to draw a line here and stop the pattern, stop this from being perpetuated anymore. Like, the line stops with me as far as this abandonment stuff, this rejection stuff goes. I'm not going to allow this to carry on any further, whether through my own kids or any future lives I have, or whatever, however you want to look at that. The line stops today. And so this is what I decided to do. So I had to kind of, expand the approach that I was using in order to make sure that I was addressing all of these different facets where the trauma was hiding. And as predicted, this trauma clearance was a very snotty experience. But, excuse me, what surprised me was because this trauma clearance was a combination of unknown experiences for me. Obviously in the past life and my ancestral stuff, there's a lot of there that I wasn't aware of, that I don't have a conscious memory of, that I don't know about. But in my current life, I could point to, well, not 121 events, but certainly quite a few experiences that I can remember and point to and go, yeah, no, I remember vaguely something happening around that. And so I kind of expected to be crying a little bit, some emotional crying, some emotional pain coming up during my clearance during this one. But I didn't get any of that at all. I just had lots of tears in terms of releasing tears, and then a lot of snot, which meant a lot of tissues. So I was surrounded by a mountain of tissues at the end. But you know what? It felt so good to kind of get all that. When you're kind of blowing your nose when a lot of this stuff comes up, it kind of feels like the act of like blowing your nose and getting rid of that stuff out of the body physically just feels like it's almost like a metaphor for what you are actually getting rid of emotionally, which feels so good on some level. Isn't it weird that snotting yourself out just feels like a really good experience? But you know what? I mean, after I did that clearance, I had to go out at an early night and I slept loads, because one thing I find when I've done these big trauma clearances is that it takes it out of me completely. And I'm exhausted. I kind of can't really function much afterwards. I can barely watch a TV show, and I really have to go to bed. So I've stopped doing these things in the morning now because they've just been wiping my days out. I've got to do them late in the day. Otherwise, I'm not really good for much at all, because it's so exhausting. There's so much toxic energy that's being purged that my body just wants to go and lie down. It just wants to sleep. At least that's what I'm finding. But what's really, really interesting for me is when I kind of really want to sign from somewhere that this has worked, because it's always difficult to know whether you've truly healed something like this. And I think one of the ways that you can really tell whether you've healed something is, one of them is whether you can laugh at it and joke about it, because when it's something really painful, it's really hard to do that truly. But I think that another one is when stuff starts happening that you just kind of, for me, I just call it magic, where you think, whoa, that's really weird. What the hell's going on there? And for me, this happened the very next day. And I noticed that the more I go deeper with the healing, more deeper with this trauma clearance that I'm doing and other head trash clearance work that I'm doing, is that the further I go, the more these magical moments happen, which is kind of really motivating, because it's not easy work to do. It can be emotional. It can be difficult to kind of face some of this stuff. But when you start seeing the shifts in your life, it makes it, it kind of reminds you why you're doing this and why you want to be this better version, because you want to see these changes in your life, right? And for me, the magic around this happened the very next day. And what made it super magical was the fact that what showed up for me was directly related to having done this work, having done this clearance work. And so basically what happened is I was invited to be part of something new that's super, super exciting, like something really big and really exciting, which I can't talk about yet. But, what does that say when you're invited to be part of something? Basically, I was sought out, or I was chosen, I was picked, however you want to express that. One thing is really, really clear, and that is this, that those things there, it's the opposite of being abandoned or being left behind or being rejected. Being chosen is the opposite of that, isn't it? And actually what was happening is those things were being blocked from me because of this toxic emotional energy that I was carrying. All this emotional crap around these traumas and these experiences were just preventing some of those things from coming into my life for me. And that once I cleared that, it was now available to me. And whoomph, it landed in the very next day. And so what does that tell us? What does it tell me? It tells me that my unresolved trauma is what's keeping me stuck where I am. And that is very likely to be the case for you too, that your unresolved traumas are keeping you stuck where you are, because they're actually keeping us stuck in the very places that we desperately want to leave, And that's why I think it's really important to really face these buggers head on and get them cleared out for good, because really that's only then that you can really start shifting your life and getting more of the things in your life that you truly, truly desire, and less of the things that you just don't want. And you can move away from what you don't want and move towards the life of your dreams, the business of your dreams, and your heart's desires. And isn't that why we're here? To really live according to our heart's desires. At least that's why I'm here. And so I'm going to continue with seeking out these traumas, hunting them down, and banishing every single one of them so that I can truly be at peace with myself without that emotional pain, but also to live the life that I truly desire. And that's what I wish for you too. So if there's anything I've said today that helps you, that if you have any questions about any unresolved traumas that you're facing, anything like that, then I'm more than happy to read your emails, come back to you and give you any insights or help and guidance that I can. As I mentioned before, I'm doing some group work around helping people to clear their unresolved traumas. So do check in with the clearyourheadtrash.com website for any news. Also the group on Facebook, Clear Your Head Trash Facebook group. That's where you can find out what's going on. Okay, hope this has been helpful. Until next time, bye for now. Thanks for tuning in. You've just been listening to me, Alexia Leachman, here on The Head Trash Show. If you enjoyed the show or the book, Clear Your Head Trash, I'd really appreciate you leaving a review on iTunes or Amazon. Stay tuned for upcoming episodes for more insights, interviews and inspiration for clearing your head trash and reclaiming your headspace. Until next time, bye for now.